We're going to see if we can publish some articles on it, and maybe that could be useful. What we ended up finding when we did this study, it basically showed us, wow, there's a lot of good information here that we should get out and synthesize in a meaningful way. We always wanted like that book or that handbook that would tell us, how can we build more inclusive classroom spaces? And so we thought that we had the right data to do that. You know, the findings of the book really were helpful to really frame what inclusive instructors do. So we ended up surveying a whole bunch of faculty across institutions, different types, different disciplines, et cetera. And we asked them a number of questions, but the ones that hone in for what inclusive instructors do were specifically, what strategies, how do you build an inclusive course? And by inclusive, I'm focusing on, and this is the definition that we'll carry out today, classrooms that center sense of belonging, facilitating a welcoming environment for students that are equitable. So we're focusing on equity, not equality. So we're kind of joining that together to think about how do we build inclusive classrooms. So we asked instructors, what do they do? And we basically put it together and synthesized it. And that's what you see in what inclusive instructors do, okay? The next book, which I'm very excited to share, and I'll talk more about it later, this is coming out in March, so it's coming out soon. And soon after What Inclusive Instructors Do, we really wanted to get a sense of, we should have everybody's perspective. Students are, you know, the best informants about how to build an inclusive class. And I actually believe that thoroughly because I've been actually working with students, and I have students as partners who actually support instructors in their inclusive teaching efforts. So then we set out to do similar to what inclusive instructors do. We got students, okay? And so we both surveyed and interviewed students from across different institutions, different majors, et cetera. They're all various identity backgrounds. And we asked them specifically, what do your instructors do to build inclusive classrooms, okay? And so that's what's emerging in this book and a number of other things. Those are like the first kind of couple of chapters. But then we go into reflection and observation, and you'll see a sense of this through some of the stuff that I'll talk about today. That's our more recent work. So when we think about building inclusive classrooms, we really have to think about, you know, these particular aspects. What are concrete ways to do that? We'll talk about those. Also, what do our students think about those ways? We even asked our students, what is not an inclusive classroom? What have your instructors done that's not inclusive? So that we could identify major pitfalls, and we hear specifically from students. So that book also talks a lot about the pitfalls as well, of what you shouldn't do, and this is probably not going to be helpful and going to harm your students in some type of way. So today's conversations are going to center around the work that we've done in these two books. And so I'm going to start off with the why. You can always think about your own why. Why does it make sense to build inclusive classrooms? And it's not, you know, performative just because we should, right? This is real work that we really want to do, especially if our calling in higher education is to educate diverse student populations. No matter what class we have diversity, right? We have difference. It doesn't always think about, you know, we can think about race, gender, ethnicity, all of that, but our students differ in so many different ways when they come into our learning spaces. So if this is really our call, then how are we actually carrying out this call, right? And so we do see that we do fall short of this promise, right? So how are we seeing this? We see it manifest in so many ways. Students will say, you know, I don't feel included here. Students will leave. Retention issues, all kinds of things can happen when we don't see that this is happening across our institutions. So we know from evidence, and I could cite many, many studies that have been undertaken, that belonging matters. Belonging matters to students across institutions, no matter where you're at. It is a very human need, right? It's also in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Since belonging is in there, because we all need it, and our students need it as well. There's a bunch of evidence in the literature that supports this, okay? So belonging matters. So I don't know about you, but when I started teaching, I used to think, oh, well, you know, it's so important for me to just get up there to make sure that people understand, the students will understand, focus on the content, that I understand it, that I can communicate it well, and those are all essential things of effective teaching. But one thing I didn't do, even as somebody who's experienced a lot of interesting things in the classroom as a student, I didn't think as much as I could have. I think about sense of belonging, equity, and that kind of how does that all tie in to my teaching, right, as well. And so what we're seeing and what we know more and more is that this is actually more critical. The affective is includingly critical as everything else. The affective environment that we create in the classroom and how students feel as if they did not belong matters even more than some of the content that we even teach, right? Because if they don't feel that, they might not learn anything, right, that we teach them in our courses. So we know that this is important. We know the classroom is a place of belonging. If you ask students, yeah, they're gonna say like the cafeteria and all these events and things like that are places of belonging, but they're also gonna say, usually the classroom, and we've done some surveys in our students, and it's always in their top 5, right? That what their professors do and in their classrooms is where they feel a sense of belonging. So in that sense, the instructors have an integral role to really think about how to create these spaces in their classrooms. Now, we can't solve everything. Like when students go to another place on campus, you know, like there could be things that happen there, but we do know that in the classroom, we can do things that can support all of our learners. And so a lot of the work that we've done is really to help instructors empower themselves to think about their courses in this way. That they can build these communities where students do feel a sense of belonging. So I'm going to first start off with our work that gets into mindset. So pay close attention to some of these things we talk about because I'm going to ask you to reflect. We're also going to do some polls. So if you have a phone, I'm going to have a QR code up as well. And you can basically answer some of the polls so that we can have that interaction as well. In What Inclusive Instructors Do, one of my favorite quotes is towards the end, is being an inclusive instructor is an ongoing process that involves learning, mistakes, persistence, reflection, and a willingness to adapt teaching practices to a diverse student population. So this is all really thinking about, we're always learning. As instructors, even if you've been teaching for 30 years, you're always learning, right? The students change. The way we think about teaching changes. As you know, through this conference you're going to do, AI and all these other things, right, come up. COVID, right? Like we always are going to have this dynamic thing in higher education where we're thinking about our learners. We've never arrived. And when we think about inclusive instruction, we think about it as an ongoing journey. And there might be times where we do make mistakes, right? But acknowledging that and trying to change paths is the important thing to do. So we're going to talk a little bit about mindset. And when we did our study, we basically tried to synthesize when inclusive instructors are thinking about their classrooms, how are they thinking about it? We wanted to kind of capture that. So let's talk about a few of the major things we saw. And again, pay attention to these because I'm going to ask you to reflect on them yourselves. The first is they really wanted to know who their learners were. Who's in my class, right? And so they're thinking about the students that are in their class, not their idealized versions of the students, right, that are in their class. So they're actually trying to get a lot of information about their students to get to know them better. And in What Inclusive Instructors Do, we actually include a form that I've been working with instructors on. In fact, I just got a message today about an instructor who's using it in their courses, and they've been using this in various ways. But we have a form called Who's in Class. And it's actually a form to actually, share with your students, to invite them to participate, to find out more about them. And you might do this in some other ways, but it might be interesting for you to also look at that form. And it's also published online open access in an article, the research article we published on it. But that's the type of information, various information about students that's really important. And just to give you a couple of examples, when I work with instructors on the Who's in Class form, we'll see that, maybe some students will say they work a lot of hours, for example. And the instructor is like, oh my goodness, I didn't know students work so much. How do they have time for my class? And how do I think about that in my class? Some students might even identify with having ADHD or, neurodivergent students in some way. And then they think about that as well, okay? And how do I think about that in my class? There's a lot of different things that can come up on that form, and the instructor will tweak them. Some of our instructors actually will tell the students, I'm going to actually synthesize the form. And we actually, when we created it, we co-created it with students, and it has some questions that you wouldn't necessarily always, they'd feel comfortable answering at the beginning of a course. So we make it anonymous, and we invite them, and we still get high % rates. And so, but what some instructors will do is they'll actually tell the class, I'm going to share with you who's in class. So I'll take the big points. They're not going to take, like, if students say something very personal, but just a couple of big points and, like, who's in class, how many first generation, how much do you work, et cetera. And it has all of these types of factors on it. So what we're finding is that our inclusive instructors feel like that's critical, and they want to be responsive to the diversity in their class. So that's the first thing with mindset. The other thing that they do is they recognize diversity as an asset. So it is not a deficit that our student population is becoming more diverse. We have so many deficit models in higher education that we just need to debunk, like just get rid of, right? So if it's up to me, I'd get rid of them all. But this is the idea that when we think about our students, we actually want a diverse student population, and we want diversity in our students, in our class, and we see this as students bringing various strengths, right, to our classroom spaces. So they see diversity as an asset. They also are really focused on affirmation. And you'll see later that in some of our work, we talk about affirmation and what is it, how to do it in the classroom. But they know that some students from certain identity backgrounds, especially marginalized when they're in the minority, when students are in the minority, that they can face something called stereotype threat. And that's something we all should actually know about. Stereotype threat is a phenomenon that basically, when you're kind of having this stigma pressure against you, so maybe like all of these people are more intelligent than these people, that kind of stigma pressure, those actual students will underperform, even though they're qualified. Right? So they'll actually underperform because of this psychological threat against them. And it's not because they can't do it, right? It's not because they can't. And there's been a lot of wonderful work on that. So one of the things to think about is that that can happen in our classrooms, and it can lead to some of our students not performing the way they should. They have all this potential. And so a lot of our inclusive instructors are aware of that. They're aware of that kind of circumstance that could happen with students, and they use a lot of affirmation. As well. In addition, they take ownership. They don't say, this is just the diversity office's job, like to do an inclusive space. No, it's not. It is all of our jobs, and they see that, as well, that I can actually do this. I'm not going to be perfect. I can't control everything in my class, but there are things that I can do to build a more inclusive environment. It is part of my job. It is effective teaching, so that's how inclusive instructors see it. In addition, these two, they really think intentionally about it. So a lot of times for inclusion, people have thought about, well, I'll do this for my class, learning objectives, make sure I have this content, do this assignment, and then I'll think about inclusivity, right? It's like an afterthought. But what the inclusive instructors do is, it is not an afterthought. They're intentionally thinking about it. They're thinking about it at the start of how they design that course, right? And embedded throughout the course into teaching the course in day-to-day, okay? So they're not just thinking about it afterwards. They know that intentionality is critical with inclusivity. Otherwise, they would forget it, and it becomes habit, that's the way they think, that's the way they do things. And then lastly, they're really thinking holistically. This also gets back to knowing who learners are. They're really thinking about the whole student, everything the student brings to the class in terms of who they are as people, right, as humans. Teaching is a very human endeavor, right? We're teaching humans. And so they're really thinking about, how do I do that in effective ways, and who are the students and what are they bringing to the class, okay? So these are some of the big mindsets that we see that inclusive instructors have with regards to thinking about their teaching and about their students. So now I'd like to turn to a poll, okay? So now that you've seen these mindsets, I'd like you to think about and respond to this poll. It's kind of a rank order. Hopefully it's working well. I'll go to the computer if it's not. Let me know. But which of these most resonate with you and your work on inclusive teaching, or where you would want to be? Like, where do you see yourselves here in these mindsets. So I'll give you a minute to think about that and to take the poll. And it sounds like people are getting in to the poll? Okay, great. Switch my screen. You still need it? Okay. So let me know when you're all out because I'm going to switch the screen. Here's the code. Oh, actually, wait, I don't know what happened, actually. I don't know why my screen went out. I might need our tech support to help if I can't get this back on. Okay, it's up. All right, good. I don't know why it just went out. All right, there we go. All right, so hopefully everybody's in. I'm going to switch to see your results now. All right, so if we think about your mindsets and what really resonates with you all as a collective group the most, and all of these absolutely are important, but we know that you might focus more on some than others. So thinking about student diversity as an asset comes out on top, okay? So thinking about not these deficit models, teaching the whole student as related to that as well. Affirmation, and then the others are kind of close together. And the seventh one, I'm sorry, I imputed this really quickly because I had to transfer it, so you can ignore that seventh one there. But that's great. So keep thinking about your mindset. Every time you teach, when you go into teaching this semester, or if you work with students in other ways, think about these factors and how do you think about your students. This is really going to be helpful in thinking about driving your practices, right, and the principles that you actually espouse. So thank you for engaging in that poll with me. All right, so going a bit further, I'd like you to actually talk a little bit. So that was the poll that got you thinking. And now I'm actually going to present up the actual mindsets on the side. So let's just now start a conversation. Talk to somebody. When you think about those mindsets that you selected, I know that some came out on top. How do you see them aligning with your teaching practices? How do you see them aligning? Okay, so to kind of set the stage for thinking about what we'll talk about next, our practices. So if you can talk to someone next to you, I'll give you just a couple minutes to do that. Okay, we'll do one more minute. One more minute. So if someone didn't get a chance to talk, they can, share, change places. Sorry, I would like to see if I can have a couple of them share.
Yep.
Would it be okay to run the mic
yep.
for this part too? Okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay, we're going to come back together again, and it would be great. I know we're probably sharing so many great practices and things that you do. It would be great to have maybe like 3 or 4 people be willing to share. Tracy has the mic, but would some people be willing to share some of the ways they see in their instruction enact, some of these mindsets? Volunteers? Great.
Hello. Oh, that's really loud. Okay.
And if you could introduce yourselves, I don't know, does everybody, probably doesn't know. Okay, great.
My name is Kayla Mealy. I teach general psychology courses. So I know that mindset especially is extremely important in understanding. So in the beginning of my classes, I would ensure that they know that I want this to be a psychologically safe classroom for them. So I would go over, I did a values worksheet with them. I would set ground rules with them together, and I would have them understand my teaching style. And then, excuse me.
Bless you.
It always comes at the worst time.
Of course, bless you.
I'm like, please hold on. So I've done a lot of research on it, and I wanted to ensure that they knew that I was there with them, learning with them, and not just trying to teach them content, and have them understand you're not just learning to learn, you're learning to apply that learning. And so them understanding that I'm there with them, I received a lot of, it was very receptive.
Great.
And I did a midterm evaluation check to see where are we at in this semester? Is there anything that I should change before the end of the semester? And I'm sorry, I don't like speaking, so I'm shaking.
Thank you for speaking. Yeah.
So just understanding them again holistically as a whole student, and really engaging them and having them tell me in the middle of the semester oh, we could use a little bit more inclusion in the classroom, we can use a little bit more interaction. I'm like, awesome, duly noted. So I took that feedback and I use it for the rest of the semester, and at the end I did a reflection paper instead of a general exam, and it was just resounding. And so just having them know you made it feel so safe in the classroom. It made it feel like my anxiety lowered in the classroom. I felt I was able to speak up, and that you cared about each of us as an individual, because how much I tried to really understand them and make them feel safe as a person, because they're going through a lot. And I wanted to know, I get it, I see you. So it was very receptive, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I can't wait to do it again.
That's wonderful. So many good practices you just shared here. Setting the tone so early. Yeah. Round of applause. And you even see the students are saying it, right? They see that, they feel it, they sense it when you create these spaces for them, and then you see the rewards. So that's fabulous. So absolutely being able to set those rules up front, or those ideas of how to create this space that's going to be safe or brave space for them, that can go a long way, especially in some classes where there's a lot of discussion, et cetera. That's a really important thing. So thanks so much for sharing. We'd like to hear from someone else. Another, yes.
So we were discussing that almost
If
everything
you
on
can
the.
introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Liz
Just in case
Landers
no one
from
knows.
nursing.
Sure.
So we were kind of talking about how of those different mindsets, a lot of it is sort of like internal, like you're recognizing, you're aware, you need to try to teach the whole student, et cetera. Whereas the one that we struggle with the most, I think, is, or at least I do, is the course design piece of it, because especially where we're in a profession, a discipline that's pushing more and more towards competency-based education and measuring outcomes and providing that evidence. We think about like knowledge, skills, and attitudes. The knowledge and attitudes piece, I feel like I have down. I can create a very inclusive classroom. The feedback I get from students is generally positive in that respect, and I'm always trying to improve that. But when it comes to the skills piece of assessment in a classroom that's inclusive, that is very much a moving target for us. And I feel like it's, fortunately, I think because everybody's moving in the direction of both inclusive classrooms and competency-based education, there's been some really great, innovative suggestions out there. But when we're coming up against things like accreditation and regulation, I know what I do, but showing that it's effective can sometimes be really difficult. So I think that of the things on the list that I feel like I personally need to work on more is knowing how to design a course that's both inclusive and provides the evidence that I need to demonstrate effectiveness of teaching for competency-based education.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. We actually put a nod to the competency-based education and accreditation in our second book, because we know that it's a limitation, right? It's of many limitations we have in our teaching and what we can do. So that's really great that you mentioned that, and also thinking about course design. And we'll talk about a few things that the students said about course design and that inclusive instructors do when thinking about course design. Thank you so much for sharing. Yes, round of applause. I love the round of applause there. Would one other person like to share at least? Okay, in the back. Tracy? Thank you. Thank you for running the mic. All the way in the back.
Hi. I'm Yan. I'm a faculty member in psychology. I teach culture psych. So in our class, we spend a lot of time talking about how differences are not deficiencies. So I really identify with the second theme here, to see student diversity as an asset. But I've been trying to figure out what are the roadblocks when we talk about bringing up diversity as an asset. So it's, we want to talk about the positive side of it, but in reality, when we look at students, their personal life, how often do they interact with students that are coming from a different background? When we think about their professional future and our own professional training, how often we actually feel very comfortable and competent interacting with clients or students coming from very different backgrounds in terms of all kinds of social categories, like culturally, in terms of socioeconomics status, and religion, in terms of different religious backgrounds. So here, when one question is just, can we spend some time talking about the challenges when we teach and practice this idea on valuing diversity? Another question is, well, when we teach, how can we really send out the message? It's not necessarily convenient or very easy or quick to learn to manage diversity, so that we set our expectations appropriately. We have mentally prepare ourselves to be patient enough to manage all the challenges we're gonna face when we try to develop this cultural competency. It's very important, but it's not a very easy skill set or mindset to develop.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And what you're, yes, let's give a round of applause. So what you're mentioning, I'm thinking the discussions later, seems like a lot of rich discussion you can have on that also during your conversations over lunch. There was a recent interesting study related to what you were sharing that came out, and I think it was mostly STEM students, I want to say, but probably you could see this in other disciplines. But basically they looked at it and they said that when they saw a more diverse, when students were in a more diverse classrooms, everybody was doing better. So there was a recent, like just came out, like within the last month, study that actually affirms that how important that is, right, even for students. But I think you mentioned a number of different things. It is really a skill building thing to really think about diversity and how to support students and to have this, cultural humility, cultural competence, and that we're always growing too. There's a variety of assessments out there that can also support your understanding of your own, kind of cultural humility and cultural competence. There's like I think the IDT, there's other ones. I've taken some of these, and they're really helpful to think about how we can grow also individually and think about that in teaching. So thank you so much for sharing all that. Well, these were wonderful ways that you have been reflecting on the mindsets. And so now I'm going to move forward and we're going to talk about practices. And again, there's so many things to talk about here. We distilled this in a lot of ways in our book, but I'm going to highlight just a few big points that I'm hoping you'll capture from our conversation today. So when we were trying to think about classroom practices and applying principles and practices, we actually try to categorize them because our brain helps us think that way better. So we looked at creation of a course development. We also focused on comments that were really focusing on the welcoming space, and I think that was mentioned as well. And then just the every day-to-day conducting class assessments, all that kind of thing, and how you actually carry out your class. So when we put this all together, we did it for both books in this way because we wanted to have them complement each other. So I'm just going to give you some highlights here. So first, designing inclusive courses. How do inclusive instructors think about it? How do the students think about it? First, this is one of the big overarching things that if you could take home a couple of things of what has emerged in a lot of the work that we've done. So first, all courses that are inclusive are intentionally designed. Students will say they can follow them easily, like they're structured, and structured well, organized well. They have appropriate supports for students, so academically supporting students coming from all different backgrounds and skill sets into that course. There are supports. The instructor is very intentional about creating those supports. They have elements of choice and agency, so students have choices in the actual design with regards to whatever you're designing your course, and they account for variability, okay? So they account for the fact that students vary, okay, in some way. They're different, they learn, and different things might resonate with them. So when we actually look at our students, so this is from our students, some of the highlights, again, there's so much rich stuff there, but you can kind of see some of these quotes, like look at this one, and these students, when we collected it from students, we did ask them if they wanted to identify, share some of their identities, and so we actually have that there as well. Do you hear? Yes? Sure.
Can I ask if the students that reflecting on the part of that dynamic system, or did you ask students who were not in the?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the study group, they're two different samples, the two different populations. So it's not like the students in the courses of the instructors. So that's a good question. Yeah, we were trying to get any students we could. Students are much harder to get to do these things, but we did. It took a little while for us to get enough voices, and we also interviewed some too. So we have kind of both in that one. But that's a great question. Yeah, so there are two different populations of groups here. So my class was well set up to succeed and easy to understand. Plus, there were plenty of help topics available. okay? So again, they want organized, they're like, that makes it more inclusive for me, I could follow it, it's easy to kind of, go throughout the entire course, it's laid out well, and I also could get the help I needed in the course. Another student said, we were given very general questions for the essays, we were given freedom to choose anything that interests us. So again, thinking about this idea of choice, thinking about if students do have choice, you can't account for some variability, right? Like in certain things and assignments and whatnot, but that's another example. A third one, we were able to teach how we as individuals learned and post it to help out someone who might not understand in the way it was taught. So again, there's some elements of thinking about learner variability, how different things might strike different people or resonate with different students as well. And so they had that agency, that leverage to kind of do that. So that kind of embraces some of them. And again, there's voices throughout the whole book, right, that kind of get into a lot of these major topics. And there's a question.
Yeah, another clarifying question.
Sure.
Could you give a more specific example of what the help topics and the co-teaching look like in course design?
Okay, so there's a question about what do help topics and co-teaching look like. So this student obviously didn't nail them down, didn't say specifically this, this, this. But what we do see when we have more information from the students is that some of them are saying, and this is actually some of our students, fellows have said this, they come into class with different variation in their skills, right, and knowledge. So some of them will say, if I don't have the skills and knowledge, it's really helpful for the instructor to post certain materials to help us catch up. So that would be one example, like materials that are supplementary, but that would support them in catching up. Another example would also be having a lot of practice problems, practice tests, practice assessments, having students have a lot of opportunities to practice what they're trying to learn. And so those are kind of some support. But this can be done in so many different ways in a class, and I'm sure many of you here, if we surveyed you, you might have a lot of different approaches to it depending on the actual classes you teach as well. So they were kind of really focusing on that. So hopefully that helps a little bit to share some of the things that they were kind of thinking and that we've heard emerge from students. If we look at the instructors that think about inclusive courses, look at this one. I rewrote my syllabus to be more inclusive, a section on how to get help. And this is, again, getting to the help thing, right? So you'll see instructors say, these are the academic resources that are here on campus. These are other resources. If you need help in other ways, this is how you can get help. What office hours mean, and has demystified many aspects of the syllabus. So really focusing on the clarity of the syllabus, how students can get help when they need it, and making it really apparent and saying it to students, not just putting it in the syllabus, I think is important. It's actually saying it to them too. Inclusive teaching is creating a welcoming classroom environment for all students, having high expectation with supports for students who need it to be successful, differentiating content presentation and learning activities, and options for demonstrating mastery. So if you look at this particular quote, some of the things I'll highlight. First, sometimes when we think about inclusive teaching, people think, let's water down and make the course easy. No, that's absolutely not what we're talking about here. And you'll see it doesn't emerge in any of the things that we talk about. We need to challenge our students. That's why they come to college, right? So they're supposed to transform, they're supposed to learn. And actually, I think if you don't challenge them, that actually creates inequities because later they're not going to succeed, right? So it's like, why would we do that to them? But you can kind of see here that they have high expectation, right, for their students, regardless. That stays. And I know there's these ideas of rigor and all this other stuff, but having high expectations is important. And also here, what you'll see is support for students who need it to be successful. Again, getting into the help topics, differentiating the content, so making it appear in different ways, and then having different options for students to master the information that they're trying to learn or the skills. Last quote I'll give for this piece, I go about this by generating activities throughout the semester to find out more about my student audience, their career interests, their misconceptions about different topics, how their cultural, geographical, and generational experiences inform their own interests, perceptions of their future career goals, and self-evaluation, okay? So you can kind of see there, this instructor is really thinking about, I want to know who's in my class. We talked about that a little bit earlier. And I'm going to also use this information to think about, it's not explicit in here, but they're going to use this information to really think about the design of their course, right, as well. So they're actually doing this throughout their whole entire course, all right? So when we think about inclusive course design, those are some of the big things to think about when we're actually building these courses with our students in mind. So now let's move into fostering a welcoming environment. And we're going to play on this a lot of different ways. So this is just getting us started. So how do they do that? Well, here's the major principles I would say for this. First, demonstrate to students that they're valued, that they matter. So nearly most of our students who responded were saying, when instructors built inclusive classrooms and created a welcoming environment, I felt like I was valued, I felt like I matter, and I felt like there was equitable participation. So thinking about engaging all of the students in different ways, and not just by raising their hand, so just participation in general. And then having a positive classroom environment where that respect was given and received. And we heard that come out today in some of the sharing already, where when you create this, it plays a big role in how students think about their course, how they think about themselves, and how they think about learning, okay, the information as well. So this is a couple of big points. So let's talk about that, what we saw in our books. So for this one, and some of these quotes get on the little longer side, but if you look at this quote, everyone's opinions and voices were heard and valued by the professor and your peers. All of these approaches were effective because they were eye-opening and left a mark on your mind. Other students engaged more than I thought, and you were able to retain others' opinions in a respectful way and learn new things from your peers. So this student is clearly saying, I was heard, right? I was valued, everybody was in this course. And the instructor created an environment that happened, that was able to happen in. Look at this one. The professor is always glad to hear what you have to say and encourages raising your hand to say anything. The professor's glad to hear what you have to say. The student's like, wow, like they do want to hear from me, right? And so when we create these welcoming environments, this is what our students say about them. This is what the students say the instructor has done. Now let's look at our inclusive instructors and some of the things they do. This particular quote refers to online teaching, but it can refer to in-person teaching. My examples all refer to online teaching, provide a welcome statement with a positive tone, provide many resources for students who may have technical difficulties. Again, that's getting into that help aspect. Welcome alternate views in the online discussions, course ground rules for discussions, and this came up already, safe environment. So these types of examples are how they foster this welcoming environment from the start of the course and throughout. So let's look at this one. Students are valued for their differences in backgrounds, experiences, abilities, perspectives, internal and external pressures, and can share these freely or may choose not to do so, okay, as well, okay? So this instructor is encouraging their students to share, right, about themselves, et cetera. Again, fostering a welcoming environment. So those are a couple of ways when we move from course design now to welcoming environment. Now let's actually talk about actually integrating a class and conducting it inclusively. This is definitely an area in both books that has a huge, bigger chapter because there's so many things to talk about. So again, I'm synthesizing here some of the major points, but they're further expounded upon. This one, really, the students want to be engaged. I mean, they just want to be engaged in their learning. They want that, and they really, really, this came out like a lot in different aspects of our student study, they want time. They want time to learn. They want the instructor to manage the time well. They just want to have that aspect within the bounds of a semester or term, right? Like it's, there's always time limitations, but they want that time, okay? So our students say, having different modes of engagement helps students with learning disabilities. And we did interview and surveyed a bunch of students who had disabilities of various types and neurodivergent students. So having different modes of engagement helps students with learning disabilities or even students who don't like speaking in a classroom the chance to contribute to the class, okay? Be inclusive, and this is a big one, okay? So this student had a lot of good things to say. Be inclusive, especially to different types of learning. We split the class up by doing both group work and lecture from the professor. So we usually talk about some sort of concept, practice it in group work, in small groups within the class, get to bounce ideas off of each other. I think bounce probably there. And then kind of come back together as a whole class and review the group work. And that provides the opportunity to kind of both be an active listener, but also participating in discussion and whatever it is you're working on. That also doesn't necessarily put pressure on students who aren't comfortable with the topic. So it allows for the opportunity for people to work together in class to find solutions or to better understand concepts rather than just being lectured at and expecting them to understand what the professor is saying. So what comes out here? Collaborative work, right, with students. And we'll also talk about that. We talk about that in our book, that like, it doesn't always go, you have to structure that collaborative work. It's really important to do that. You can't just throw the students in there and expect them to always do it well, okay? Because they haven't even learned how to work in groups sometimes. But you'll see that these students, they want to be engaged in their learning in some way. And these quotes kind of capture that in various ways as well. And another thing that this last quote captures is, and this comes throughout our student study, they don't want to be just lectured at. So they said that in many different ways. Just let us engage in many ways in class, and don't just lecture at us as well. Now, we're going to see variation, right, with students. Maybe some students will say that, right, like I'd rather be talked at and whatnot. But we know from the science of learning that engagement is critical, right, if we want people to learn. All right, so what do the inclusive instructors do? I'll give you just 2 quotes here. Structure major assignments with benchmarks, recursive feedback that will help all learners understand the expectations and improve their work, even those who aren't as familiar with the methods and assumptions of higher education norms. Similarly, provide frequent low-stakes assessments leading up to major assignments so that learners have an opportunity in mentorship with the faculty and perhaps also peer feedback to identify and develop key proficiencies they may have initially overlooked. So there's a lot here. And this is, again, further distilled. But if you look here, structure is important. Giving students benchmarks, milestones, and structuring them in that way. That's going to be good for all of our students. Also neurodivergent students, everybody is better with some type of structure typically, okay? And then you also see help all learners who don't understand the expectations and norms, who aren't as familiar with the methods and assumptions, right? So this again gets into this idea of demystifying things, right? So making it clear. Sometimes even after we've been teaching for many years, you might think these things students should know. They don't always know them. We have to make sure that we don't assume things about students. And that's not a deficit. Maybe no one told them. Maybe they didn't have that experience, right? So we don't want to view that as also a major deficit all the time too. And then you also see low stakes assessments. So that also comes up as an inclusive approach, that students have opportunities to practice, right? They practice the skills, and it's not going to kill their whole grade by just doing some practice, and that will actually help them learn better. So this quote here captures a bunch of different interesting strategies. And then I'll just share this smaller one. I use team-based learning, think, pair, share, team quizzes, class projects that address real-world problems with multiple possible answers. So you can see this instructor is using a variety of different modes of engagement for their learners as well. Okay, so before we get into kind of our next part, what I want to do is now just link things that we talked about. We talked about mindset, and we talked about some of these big principles and practices. So the first one, intentionally design courses that are easy to follow. They have the support students need. They give students some agency or choice, and they account for the fact that not all students are the same. Will they learn the same? Different things might resonate with different students. Demonstrate to students that they're valued, right? Create classroom environments that cultivate that and foster an environment where students feel included and they can engage and feel comfortable engaging. And that's not necessarily comfortable with the topic, just that they want to engage with the topic. Engage students with varied learning experiences and give them time to learn. So we can kind of see, if we look at these practices, major principles, right, of inclusive instructors, and we think about these mindsets, we see an alignment, right? We see here that you have to know who your learners are if you're going to do these things, right? And think about them in the classroom. We see them seeing that diversity as an asset. We see them, thinking about how to affirm or value their students. All of these mindsets are kind of integrated into these particular principles that we can actually apply to classroom teaching, okay? All right, well, thanks for going on that little journey with me. Now I want you to do the following, okay, so that we can actually talk a little bit more. Share with someone next to you which inclusive teaching approach, you might have shared with some already, but maybe share with someone different. Which inclusive teaching approaches have you found to be successful in your courses? Okay, so if you can take a minute, share with someone next to you. If you can share with someone else, that'd be good, and you can talk to someone else about it. Water. Once you've shared your approaches, I would love to capture them, and I'll send this also to Tracy of the polls. If you could actually share them in the poll once you've shared, okay? And then we'll collectively kind of crowdsource some of the things that you've been doing as well, okay? But feel free to keep sharing, and then once you have a minute, share some up there. And let me actually make sure the poll is active. Hold on one second. Oops, I don't want to share it. I keep pressing share. There we go. Okay, great, there we go. All right, should be active now. Sliding down a little bit. So we'll do like 1 or 2 more minutes, and then if you can finish your poll, we'll look at kind of collectively some of the things that you've talked about, and then we'll take a break, okay? Okay. All right, it looks like a lot of you have put a lot of great strategies in, so keep going. I'm going to go over these. We'll talk about these in just a few minutes, in just a minute, actually, less than a minute. All right, well, we've gotten a number of responses, so let's come back together again. So, of the inclusive teaching approaches that you found to be successful, there's a lot of great information here. I see a lot of group work, group assignments in different ways, group projects, group collaboration as well. I see also some individual meetings with students. So not only are they engaged in collaborative work, but also meeting with them as well. Giving students some choice in mastery as well. I see lots of different modes of engagement as well, and planning the course and student involvement. Okay, so that's another one. Let's see here. So structure has come up in a lot of different ways here. Specific strategies like flipping the class, case studies and presentations as well, an inclusive study method low stakes assessments and small group work. That's coming out really strong here as well. I see an expanded view of office hours. So I know that, there's been a lot of kind of movement to really rethink the office hour, right? What is it about? What is it for students? Can we make it also student hours, informal hours, invite students to come and make it a more inviting and informal space as well? I also see here grace periods, flexibility with group work. I'll tell you, in our student study, a lot of the students talked about the idea of flexibility. That also, to them, builds a more inclusive class, if you can actually embed it within your course structure, and I see that coming out as well. I see, again, one-on-one conferences, inclusive classroom guidelines as well. Humor, making it funny. So if you're funny, you can make jokes. And I'll tell you one thing in our student book that we talked about humor. So some students said, yeah, it's really great when the instructor is makes it fun and is humorous. But the counter of that, in the pitfall, is that when they feel like their instructors were condescending or making jokes that were inappropriate, and they said that they experienced that as well, and that actually did not help them build an inclusive class. So that humor has this two-edged, right, wrong. So just make sure humor, it's going to support and build and uplift, right, our students as well. So I think that's great. Also, I see introducing themselves in discussions as well. I love the sense of humor reassuring students. There's never a dumb question, yes, and they still feel that way, right? Students might still feel inhibited to ask. And inviting students, is there anything you want to know about me? Okay, also, yeah, thinking about pronouns and things like that. And yeah, so having this conversation, this instructor found out that their parent just passed away. So that's big, right? When we have these conversations with students and they can actually share that as well, share things with you as well. And I also see mid-semester check-ins and the acronyms, yeah, demystifying the jargon, the words, et cetera, on the actual syllabus. So there's collectively a bunch of different really great strategies, right, that you're trying, across here at Endicott as well. So that said, so we're going to actually take a little break. It's always good to have a brain break. Actually, our students said that too. Build in brain breaks, especially for longer classes, right? So it's not, for every class. But they take a break. So enjoy some coffee. We're going to come back in 15 minutes. So if you can come back in 15 minutes, and we'll do the next part. We're just getting started, so don't leave. Great. I think I'm good. I'm just going to run to the bathroom real quick.
I'm curious because group work came up.
So there are lots of different structures that we like about it. But I just feel engaging them in which was interesting to me too. Sure. It's really good. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's true. And it's a lot of these approaches, right? It's you don't do them well. Yeah, there's a lot of engagement, so it's good to continue. How many do you have? And you're interesting, you have to do the health professionals. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, for us, it's interesting because we have engineering. Engineering has strong engineering undergrad programs, and so that's one of the careers. So they've been really, they're literally wanting to be more liberal arts, but they feel like, even though engineering's strong and great, yeah. It's like, so they're like, they have that concept. Yeah, it's so interesting to kind of see.
So CC was like that with business.
Okay.
And with education.
Yeah, yeah. It's just hard because it's like different philosophies and frameworks, right? And how do you meld them together all the time? It's hard. People come from different places.
But for us, I think we're really well
Yeah.
part of our job is we just need to be central.
Yeah.
We need to build.
Sure.
For like 10 different reasons. Plus, our students take so many classes.
Okay.
Because another question that came to me when we were talking was like the time.
Yeah.
Students say they want time.
Yeah.
And I want to know what they mean by that.
Sure, sure.
You know?
Yeah.
And I also want to know like how our strategy, like our students are often taking as many as 6 classes a month.
Okay.
Because our courses
Are those like the
pretty
nursing
crowded.
or just everyone?
Ed tech.
Wow.
Because
Okay.
with the standard curriculum for educators in Massachusetts.
Yeah, it's really structured. And that's hard because, again, when we have these structural challenges, we just only can do the best we can do. Like, I mean, it's going to be really hard because we have to teach to this accreditation. Yeah.
If we look at our general education,
Sure.
as an institution, that would be, with these classes, there may be fewer of them, but they're impact.
Sure.
We should use
I'm going to use the restroom real quick, and we should.
I know,
How many more? When do you want them to come back?
Like at 10:35 will be great. They have a little bit more time. All right, I just found my pen and I. Just want to make sure, did I answer your question well with the help topics?
Sorry?
The help topics. I remember you answered a question about
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Okay,
I was just trying to, thought it was a great idea. Like,
sure.
We use the Canvas, which is a
Yep.
form of Blackboard.
Yep. We have Moodle. I've been on Canvas though before, yeah.
So I had been putting them in kind of a resources section on the modules, like administration resources, and a week by week thing. I don't think students go there that much, so I'm wondering if it had been structured more like forms online. There's a little help bubble over
Sure,
here.
sure.
I was just trying to picture what that student meant.
Yeah, yeah,
Literally standalone topics that you could.
sure.
How do I do IPA? Just click on.
And you could click and say, okay, I'm gonna get more support here. It'll be really interesting with generative AI. And actually, I'm running a session like this on my campus where we're thinking of more personalized learning and help. I'm just thinking about the help topics thing, and we could actually build chatbots like for students that would give them the help they need. They could ask it questions
So
and
when
things
it
like
comes to
that.
write the final paper, they just click one button. Well, the other thing I've been thinking about AI is that, especially in terms of diversity ratings,
Yeah, yeah,
algorithms based on
absolutely.
probability and the
Yeah.
most
Likely word
common,
would
the
come
most
next.
likely.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you need kind of anti-chat to open people's minds.
sure.
Maybe there's a way of addressing.
Yeah, at the very end, we'll talk about it a little bit. Yeah, yeah. That's, I mean, it's such an important topic, especially tied to equity and inclusion.
Because it's been, the first time, I thought I was going crazy when I was reading it. It
Yeah.
just felt like someone had written all the students.
Wow.
Come across stuff that's clearly not written. But everyone was like using, and I did this myself.
Yeah.
I'm interested.
Sure, sure.
Papers.
Wow. So it was clear
Sometimes
that they
complete
all.
sentences,
Yeah.
use of adverbs is a giveaway.
Wow. Yeah.
Deftly, it's like that's not a word you use.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, but
Do you have a policy on AI?
we have pretty good filters, but it wasn't catching them. I was told.
What do you do here for that? For filters? Yeah. Because they say a lot of the plagiarism detectors don't work well.
Yeah, well,
And then
I
they
ran-
target
there's
students,
a
yeah.
no GPT. I use that myself. Some kind of AI filter onto the
Interesting.
turn in.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Huh.
But it's mostly.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. I think I'm good. Yeah, I have some water. I'm good. Thank you so much for asking. Yes.
I
Hi.
would like, reach out and also, introduce myself.
Sure,
My name is Maria
yes.
Wong. I'm
Nice to
Associate
meet you.
Dean of the Social Science, Communication, and Humanities.
Oh, okay.
I work with Tracy.
Great.
We're co-teaching together.
Oh,
and I'm
nice.
highly
Is this the
involved-
course that you're co-teaching this semester?
Yeah.
Nice.
And
Okay.
then I'm also involved in the Society for the Teaching of Psychology.
Oh,
and they're
yes,
like,
yes.
really fabulous faculty development people.
Yeah,
really
I've always heard
program
great
and-
things, and my colleagues in psych who go to those, like
Yeah.
they're like they really like that.
Yeah,
that-
thank you so much for your talk. So
Sure.
fun, really enjoying it.
Oh,
So,
great, great.
Would you be so kind to sign the book?
Absolutely, absolutely. I love signing the book. We always say our book came out like during COVID, so we couldn't sign a lot of them initially, but now I get to sign them. Yes. Let me just actually, so I can put on something hard. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm excited about your new book. You say it's going to come out in
Yes, it's coming out in March. Pre-orders are February. So yeah, so check it out. Like, yeah, it's so wonderful. We're gonna have actually a book launch, so I'll tell you all about that too. And this is a student's perspective book, as I mentioned. So I had 2 students write the foreword, and they were students that had engaged in a lot of the inclusion, stuff that we did. So they're gonna join the book launch. Yeah.
it's so important to have like both sides of the story.
Definitely. Absolutely. All right.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
Tracy.
absolutely. Nice to meet you too. Have a great course too this semester. All right. All right. Okay, no problem. We'll come back together. It's not always easy to come back. Good time. We're going to get started in just a minute. I hope you had a nice break, got some coffee or tea or water. A little bit more water.
No, I get that. It's
Get a little bit
difficult.
more water. All right, we'll get started. Just gonna get water. I'm coming. Hello. Good. All right, good. Tracy. I'm not sure what happened, but it's not showing what's on my screen.
Awesome. You go back home.
Okay. No. Oh, okay, now it is. Hopefully, Tracy, we're good. Thank you. Hopefully it will keep doing this. All right, well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a nice break. Next, we're actually going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about how do we really think about the approaches that we do in teaching and reflect on those approaches. And so what I'm going to introduce to you next is some of our even more recent research. I worked with students a couple years ago to create a observation protocol for inclusive teaching. It's called the PATE, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, the Protocol for Advancing Inclusive Teaching Efforts. The students and me have been using this. We've been doing it over hundreds of classes the last several years to help instructors get feedback on their inclusive teaching approaches. So it really focuses on this idea of like, what are you doing in the classroom in a data-driven way that's really scaffolded and can be really helpful to think about how to transform practice. We've had a lot of great feedback on it. Now we're in the place where we're also probably going to do more research on it now that we've focused on just building a robust instrument. So when we think about inclusive teaching, we can kind of capture specific behaviors that you can do in the classroom setting. And so the Protocol for Advancing Inclusive Teaching that we publish, it's published online, it's open access, basically is doing that. And we basically use the research and what we know from inclusion, what is impactful for students and their learning. And actually, we're going to try to do more research with this next, is our next goal. And we created this classroom observation protocol. And these are just a couple of sample codes. There's about 15 that are various codes that describe what the instructor is doing in a class, so throughout the whole class. So the observer comes in, and then they kind of tally off what the instructor is doing in their class. So here's a couple of examples, like prior knowledge. We know that the science of learning and thinking about learner variability, which came up big in some of the students' responses, that we should always start with what students know already or what they can do when we can, because that's going to help them build upon that knowledge or those skills to help them grow. If we start at a higher level, they're going to have a hard time because there's a big gap, right, between where they are and where we're trying to take them into the next level. So prior knowledge assessment is like the instructor just measuring students' knowledge. Maybe they do a quick poll or they ask students quickly, what do you already know about this topic? Or what have you done before with regards to this type of writing exercise or something like that. The diverse examples is just presenting a various perspectives or people or et cetera, viewpoints in the class. So they're actually showing things from not just one angle. So that's diverse examples. Diverse visuals and media, using a variety of things, and I'm trying to do that today. I have slides, I have what do you call them, videos, vignettes, and things like that. You know, you're going to have a handout. So presenting different things in different ways. And then REAL is basically thinking about relationship building. Actually, that should be REL, R-E-L, relationship building. And that's building in this informal student-student or student-instructor conversation. So again, those are just a few of the many, and we're going to actually talk about these, and I'm going to have you reflect on all of the codes today, because that's going to help you also thinking about your practices as well. So this next segment, again, it's a quiet reflection first. So consider these codes, and I'm going to show you a little video vignette that we created for training purposes for the PATE. But what I'd like you to do is just look at all the codes and kind of get them in and think about them. And think about which of you implemented or which might you consider in the future. I will tell you that the PATE has been really neat to see instructors think about the feedback. They're like, I'm not used to thinking about a class in that way. And like, oh, I didn't know I was doing that, or I didn't know I wasn't doing that. Or I want to do more of that. So they'll do 2 observations. You know, we usually do multiple for everybody, but 2 observations, and they'll see so they can see change. Maybe I want to use more growth mindset language in my class. And it also includes the observer noting context, you know, different contextual things or different things that were said and done in the class. So it's not just only the data, you know, in a quantitative way. So let's see if I can get this video hopefully to show. I'm just going to show one part of it, this training module. This is all part of a project called Inclusive Teaching Visualization. And this is a project that I launched, I think, a couple of years ago now, where you can actually go to the website, inclusiveteachingvisualization.com. It's to actually think about how do we visualize inclusive teaching? What does it look like in the classroom? How can we reflect on our teaching by seeing what it looks like? So we ended up doing a bunch of vignettes. I created these cases based on all the examples in my teaching and other people's teaching that I've observed over many years. And we actually have those on the site. I'm hoping to actually create more. And so they're kind of demos acted out, and you're going to actually see some of them today. So this is all part of that project, and the PATE is just one aspect of it as well. So let's see if we can get this to play. If you need a transcript, I also did link that to the original presentation. All right. And you can still see my screen? Hope. Oh, no, but you can only see the other screen. Hold on 1 second. I'm using a different computer, so I'm navigating, having to show you stuff on it. So let me see if I can get it to go. Let me see if I close this one. Then I can get that one up. No, you still don't see it. Drag it over? Okay, I'll try that. Drag it, let's drag it. That way didn't work. Do you see anything? No? That way? Ah, there we go. But then I don't see it. Okay. Okay, I'll try to play it without seeing it. Let me see if I can do this. Let me move the podium up a little bit here. Or maybe I can just, where is the mouse? There it is. All right, there we go. A little humor, right? Okay, so we'll play the first part of this. And it does have a little bit of music. Hopefully the internet will be happy for us. These are all the codes that I mentioned earlier. Okay. So hopefully that gives you a good sense or an overview of some of the codes and the instructional approaches that sit kind of on the PATE or are used with the PATE. Of course, observers can look at other things too, but these are reliable. We had reliability and did all that statistics, et cetera, to make a more robust instrument. And these ones came out to be, pretty reliable in the end, or very reliable in the end. So thinking about the PATE, what I'd like you all to do is, as I mentioned, I wanted you to reflect on your own practices in general, but I'm going to show you some more videos and vignettes. So let me see if I can get out of this screen here. La, la, la. Let me see if I can get out of here easily. Maybe I can hit escape. Will that work? No. You have to have a sense of humor with technology. Where's the bottom right? Okay, we'll see if I can do that. There we go. One more. All right. I got it. Okay, there we go. Excellent. Thank you. Your assistance is perfect. So essentially, if we look at the PATE and we think about kind of some of the things that we see, let me see if this will come up as well. My slides up? Are my slides up? Yeah, they are. Okay, perfect. All right, so if we look at the PATE, we'll actually see, and I'm going to keep going back to where I want to be, different results for it. So essentially, we can graph it in different ways or visualize it in different ways, the data. We have pie charts, we have tables, et cetera. But what you might see is something like this in a class, right? So you did the class, and what do you see? Lo and behold, wow, this instructor, they use a lot of diverse visuals and media. So maybe that's one of their predominant inclusive teaching approaches that they use. And it's absolutely okay. We don't say you have to use all of these approaches. That doesn't make sense. It's just you're using a variety of approaches in your classroom. And what we'll find is that, and what I'll find is that there's certain subtypes of instructors. There'll be high affirmation, high diverse visuals, et cetera. And that's a predominant mode, and that's fine. But we also talk about or have conversations about what other things can you do. And in this case, there's a bunch of things you can do. Some things you might not ever see in a class, right? You're not expecting to necessarily see. You would hope to have to do exclusionary acts very few times, if ever, right, in a class. So you're not going to maybe see that one as much. And maybe prior knowledge you'd only see most of the time at the beginning of some classes. So this is a type of thing that the feedback that we get from our instructors and we give to them to support their inclusive teaching. And that's why I want you to think about these types of practices and to self-reflect on what you think you would see in your classroom, if you thought about all of these instructional practices. But we're going to actually do this in an even more defined way, and we're going to use this project. So as I mentioned, we recorded a bunch of demos of instructors with short clips acting out a variety of inclusive teaching approaches. We tried to concentrate them so they're not too long, and so that you could identify them. So what I'd like you to do, I'm going to show you 3 different vignettes. After each vignette, what I'd like you to do is to think about the inclusive teaching practices that you might see in this vignette. And then I'd like you to talk with someone about them, and then we'll come back, okay, together to talk about what we see here. All right, so let me maneuver this again and see if I can play it. So let's see. I might have to drag it back because it's kind of over here, but let's see if I can do it. Where will play? I don't know what just happened. I'm going to drag it. I'm going to try to drag it back so I can see it if I can't get it to work. And then, does anyone else have this issue when they use these computers? Okay. Is it just the computer? Because my computer never does this. Okay. Let's try that.
Ready to be an e-commerce pioneer?
All right, so we're going to skip
Our
off
baked-in
the
premium
early stuff.
plugins give you the best ingredients to customize your store so you can start selling everywhere.
Might take me a minute.
WordPress made easy as pie.
Okay,
right, so
now
try
in
this
each
one.
of your groups, take 5 minutes and use the images on your laboratory desks and explain how blood flows through the heart. I'll check in on you in a few minutes to see how it's going. Okay, let's do a quick check-in. Somebody tell me how blood passes through the heart. Go ahead, Ren.
So it goes in through the pulmonary veins, because here are the lungs. It goes through the left atrium, through the mitral valve,
Sure, yep.
and into the left ventricle. Goes up through the aortic valve.
Pumps through, that's very important. The ventricle pumps it up through, yep.
Okay, so it pumps it through.
Terrific.
And then through the ascending aorta, and then it comes back through this, right?
Correct. After it's used up in the body, it needs to be reoxygenated, so it has to go back into the heart to get back to the lungs. Very good.
Okay, so I know you all don't probably teach biology, anatomy and physiology lab, but there are some really interesting things that you could probably distill from that. So if you could talk to someone next to you, what inclusive teaching practices did you see? Did you see in that particular vignette? Okay, so share. Hi. Can you help me with this? Because it's so hard because you can't see anything.
It's very hard.
Yes. I would love to be able to see it though.
Yeah.
You
so
can't.
I think
Yeah, like on the screen.
if we could move this.
I mean, like on the screen. Can you get it on the screen?
On the screen.
Okay. Because you can't see it.
No, you
Okay.
can't.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to keep moving in and out. So I think I'll go back to the presentation. Thank you so much. I know it's not easy, is it? It's not easy.
Not easy.
No.
And
We got the one. We'll try to do the next one.
no, and I came here just so people.
See, it's tricky. That's a tricky thing.
Can you be tech support?
She's having a hard time too. It's hard. It's hard to do.
But the thing is that the mouse doesn't show here. So I was like, where are the video people? But so we don't see the mouse.
Yeah. At all.
So no, we only see the screen.
So I'm gonna close this. Let's close this one. Let's close this video, and then I'm gonna do the next one.
So if you
Oh, you can't even. What, are you using the mouse?
Can you just escape out of it?
I was trying, but it doesn't escape the right screen. So if you hit escape.
no, it's
Oh, that one did it. Okay, good. Okay, that one did it. Okay, good. So I'll just go back to my.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay.
so if you
Kind of like.
if you move from to the next page.
Yeah. So I want to go to, actually, I'll just go to the next video because they're talking. I'll go to the next video just to get it ready. And I might not do that many of them.
You need to show another video.
I was going to show two, yeah, three. Yeah. So I need to get rid of this one. So if we can X out this. And then I will go back to this side. I don't see the mouse, so. Oh, there it is.
I think you have to close that video first.
All right, and then I'll just keep this up because I can't even, it's like I don't see my PowerPoint here either.
All the time.
This isn't my computer. No, just it's now. Yeah.
Because if you click here,
Yeah, I see my presentation if I click there, but I don't see, but it's not moving with it's not moving with the
I
presentation.
think
It's only this one.
so it alternates.
Yeah.
So if you click here, at least it comes back to the screen for you to do anything that you want, and then you click back, it's gonna go there.
Yeah, it's kind of doing it, but
Yeah. So
fine.
if you
I think we're
click
good.
here, where do you want to go here?
I want to go there, but it's not showing me it because it's on this other screen. This is the screen I'm seeing up there. You see what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's okay though. I think it's good. I'll just, when this one's ready, I'm gonna get this one up. And once they're ready, I'm gonna
Because
go back.
after this, where do you want to go?
Yeah.
This is ClickUp. ClickUp is an all-in-one productivity software where you can manage everything and anything related to your work. Your
And then
documents.
eventually I'm gonna stop using it. Okay, all right, thank you. All right, so what inclusive teaching approaches do we see in this particular video? What did you see? I'm curious. Yes, and I'll repeat it. Affirmations, yeah. So this particular instructor uses a lot of affirmation, good job, or those types of phrases to support the students so that they know they're on the right track or they're making progress in their answers. Yes.
He wasn't very inclusive, regardless of diversity. He only got answers from one person at the table. So
Okay.
he could have included other students.
Okay, so the comment was he wasn't inclusive to everybody, but so he did do certain things with that one student, and he asked for volunteers, but he could later also, and this was a small clip, engage the other students, right, in dialogue and have them share what they learned, or what they know about how blood passes through the heart. Okay, great. Yeah, absolutely. Good points. Any other things you saw besides that? There were a few more. Comprehension check. So absolutely asking them, to make sure that they understood how blood was passing through the heart. So that was a big comprehension check. I saw another hand.
It looked like he had the name tags to call every student by their first name.
Yeah, so this instructor had name tents up, and so the instructor could call the students by their names and learn them, et cetera. And maybe you know them, maybe they know them already, but in this case, you can use name tents. And I saw another hand.
Use of materials, the fact that he was carrying a model of the heart.
Absolutely. Yeah, so he had a physical model, and the students had models. It's hard to probably see in the video. They also had like a paper that also showed that as well. So using a variety of different ways to help them capture what can be a very difficult topic, right, for students to understand and learn. So absolutely, those were a lot of the good practices here. I'm just going to show one more. I'm not going to show too many videos because it's weird to not see them, not see myself be able to see them. So let's look at this one and think the same thoughts. What inclusive teaching approaches do you see?
Chats, your whiteboards, your projects. The value of this, you don't have to buy 5 softwares to do this.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started, I'd like you to please review all the feedback that I wrote on your papers. I have really good news. Overall, as a class, you are making incredible progress on your writing, and I have even better news. The more you write, I promise you can all develop into even stronger writers. Now, I'd like you to revise your paper, and I'd like you to turn in a new version next week. For our next trick, I'd like you to pass around these note cards. And on a note card, I'd like you to just jot down a few sentences about what you plan to revise in your essay, and I want you to pass them on back to me because I'd like to have a sense of what you learned from looking at my feedback.
Okay, and then by the way, one of the practices that I'm trying to do to be inclusive here is to include the captions. So that's also a good thing to do if you have videos. Just include the captions. It's good for all students. All students can appreciate the captions. All right, so if you can turn to someone, what did you see there? What inclusive teaching approaches did this instructor use? can see it. Oh, it's on the other side. Okay, let's see if we can come back together again. What did you see for this instructor? What inclusive teaching approaches did they use? This instructor. Any? Yes. Okay, so we saw name tents again with the students, so they could call them, by the student's name. You could also have the students spell out their names phonetically. They can put their pronouns on there. There's a lot of things you can do with name tents. Other things that we saw? Yes.
There was the growth mindset of doing more writing and making progress as you do more writing.
Absolutely. Lots of good growth mindset language there, right, with their skills and their writing skills. Thank you. Great. Other things?
Less of a focus on the outcome and the grade and more of a focus on the learning and the shared feedback.
Yeah, no, don't we want more of that, right? Like we don't want, everything to be so tied to the grades. We want students to learn. And so this instructor was definitely kind of emphasizing that a lot. Did you see anything else?
Well, and him asking the students to write down what they would do, it was a way of also checking that what he had, the feedback, that they had comprehension of that. So
Yeah.
that was it.
Absolutely, yeah. So definitely getting that feedback from the students, and I think this is a good practice, right? Because it encourages them to look at it and to think about what make meaning from it, and to actually share that. Another one.
I think that the setup of being on the same table helped with relationship building, and he was using the joke of like for the next trip.
Yeah.
So it was more of an informal instructor to students.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we see a little bit of humor, in this instructor, and the way that, they have humor, and absolutely the smaller table and the smaller environment can be helpful in those settings too. We can think about space too, right? And how that can help build an inclusive classroom as well. So thank you. Thank you for all of those. Those are all things that, this instructor definitely, we try to, show them actually doing as well in their class. So I'm going to move on to some of the others. I'm not going to show another video just because it is not liking me today. But let's kind of move on. So we talked a bunch about principles and practices and thinking about inclusive teaching. What I wanted to do was to make sure that we actually had also some additional scenarios that you could apply some of this information to in a very kind of more realistic way. Although a lot of this was realistic, I hope for you. Hope this really does resonate with you. So I'm going to talk through a couple of the cases. You should have gotten the handout when you came. If you didn't, I know they were outside. And these actually show the various cases and examples. And so what I'm going to ask you in a few minutes is if you can meet, and you can actually have a small group, like 3 or 4 actually is fine too, but I'd like you to choose a couple of the cases and then talk through them. So I'm just going to give you kind of the highlights from the cases. The first one is stressors and mental health. We know that this is challenging, right? It's been challenging through COVID, it was challenging before COVID, and thinking about students and mental health. So let's say you have a student that can't complete their assignment on time. They tell you that they've had these mental health challenges and are asking for some grace, but then they actually do that again, and it's major assignments. These are major assignments, right, for the student. So think about those principles of inclusive course design. What might you do to try to support this from the start, design? And then also, how do you make this student feel welcome in that space? And then that student does share with you that they had some mental health challenges. And how do you still make sure they're learning, engaging them in their learning? So that's the first case. Second case is a larger class. I know you might not, what's the largest class you all teach here? 30? Okay. So maybe you'll say larger classes, maybe not a large class. So thinking about like, how do I make an inclusive environment, but I feel limited by the size of my class? How do I make this environment? So you can choose or not choose that one. Again, choose 2 of them. That would be great. The third one is workload. This is more getting into thinking about yourselves. So a colleague in your department wants to spend time designing their course using these approaches. These are things that you all are thinking about. but they feel like they have a heavy load, a course load. They can't do it. They find the curriculum to be very limiting, and they'd rather teach the way they've been teaching, okay? And it's mostly all didactic, let's just say, because it's more efficient, right? And it's easier to do and to get everything. So what advice would you give them? Okay, so that's another case. Injustice. Let's say you just had a class right after the media released a horrible kind of video. In this case, I said the fatal beating of Tyre Nichols, who's a victim of police brutality. And let's say your class is happening right after, right, that. What in your class, let's say a student says something and it seems a little bit insensitive and could be harmful to other students. So how might you basically think about this scenario with regards to designing your class, with regards to inclusive environment and engaging students, okay? The fifth case is really about devaluing. So let's say that an instructor implements a lot of approaches in your department, but some of their colleagues are like, why are you doing that? They're dismissing their efforts. They think they're watering down the material. They don't think, they're providing a good experience for the students and indoctrinating them too. We added that. So what advice would you give to that instructor to support them in their inclusivity goals? So some of these are challenging, right? Multilingual learners. Let's say you have students in your class that are international students. They're multilingual students. They typically will talk to each other during those group activities the students all talked about. So they'll say that they'll actually talk in their first language to each other, but not English. And so then a student in their group who doesn't understand their language says they feel excluded. They come to you, they say, I understand they're talking in their native tongue, but I can't understand them and I feel excluded, and this is a group project. So how would you kind of think about that in terms of building, an inclusive class where all of the students feel welcome, right, as well? And then the last one is our quiet learners. So let's say there's class discussions and there's students, and as we all know, that are eager to answer. They're first, raising their hand. But then there's some students that are quieter, and we'll always have quieter students, in classes and in general. Much of the world is not extroverted. So we have to also acknowledge that. So how do we think about this in terms of inclusive course design? And in also the welcoming environment that we create to encourage students to actually engage as well. So those are the 7 cases. So what I'd like you to do is choose at least 2 of them, talk about them with a small group near you, and then we'll come back together again. So we'll give you at least 10 minutes or so, but I'll keep track of time, okay, to talk through these. if you haven't already, if you can switch to the next case in the next minute or so, if you haven't already. Can you raise your hand if your group has talked about 2 already? Has talked about 1? 1 case? Okay. We'll give you another couple minutes. Okay, I'm doing another check. Who's been able to start talking about 2 of the cases? Raise your hand if you've started talking about 2 of the cases. At least 2. 1? Just 1? Okay. So nobody's gotten to 2 cases? Okay, so a couple people, okay. Okay, great. Okay, great. So let's come back together. Just if you can finish up your conversation, we'll come back together. And even if you did get to 1, I think that's great. We won't be able to go through every single case, of course, but I think we can talk through some highlights. I'd just like to get a sense. I'm going to do kind of a room heat map here. So raise your hand if you talked about case 1. I want to get a sense of which ones were most popular. Okay. 2? Nobody. 3? Okay, few. 4? Okay. 5? 6? 2? And 7. Okay. We know which ones were most popular. Okay. All right. So it's always interesting because like there's a psychological thing where we do like the first and the last, and it seems like that came out here. All right. So first case. Let's actually talk a little bit about this one. Okay, so let's start off with that one. So this one's the stressors in student mental health. Again, the student is confidentially informing you that they have mental health challenges. They're not completing their assignments. And Tracy, will you be able to run the mic for this one? Okay. On time, their major assignments, the student's going to be having very much so difficulty in the class because they're not completing things because of this. So I'd love to hear a couple of responses around what do we think about this? How can we build an inclusive course design that could even potentially help address some of these issues the student faces? How do we make sure the student feels welcome still and maybe continues and is able to complete this particular course if it makes sense for them to do so? And how do we engage them? So those who started with this case, I'd love to see who would like to volunteer some of those answers. What did you talk about? Case 1. Yes.
Hi, I'm Marissa Mickey. I teach in the School of Sports Science. I think some of the things that we talked about with this, one would actually be involving some of the academic support that we have on campus. And so it kind of goes back to showing the student you care about their whole self. And so beyond just the classroom, making sure that they have the different types of supports that they're going to need, both academically, mentally, so that students feel like they are supported enough to kind of come to you and to help keep you informed of what's going on.
Great, yeah. So making sure that they are aware of these resources on campus, right, that can actually support them and their mental health. Sometimes, I don't know if you've had some students ever come to you and be like, I never knew that this was on campus till like my junior year or something, and it was like transformative, right? So whether it's counseling services, talking to advisors, deans, or whatever, this is all things that are really good for the student in a conversation. Other thoughts? Yes.
So, thank you. Michael Ocean, I teach computer science. One of my policies is that if a student is out sick or misses class for any other reason, if they can let me know ahead of time, I'll record class for them, and I'll make that recording available. So if a student is unable to make it to class for whatever reason, they can, if they've let me know, they can at least catch up with the material at their own pace, which is probably a design change that want students know.
Great, yeah, so absolutely. So having the option for a student to be able to, have the recording and whatnot when they can't, when they're unable to attend, I think that's a great inclusive practice. All right, other thoughts on this one? Yes.
Rina Naik, interior architecture. So offering them office hours, that came up really strong in our group, and actually asking the student to really understand what is it that they are struggling with, and to understand and maybe help them manage their workload or plan for how to get caught up and things like that might be some very tangible ways to help them.
Okay, so helping them have their own academic plan to accomplish or achieve, this, and making sure that it can actually help, help them and to actually move on. Great. Okay, thank you. Any other things? Yes.
I think the most important
It'll allow everybody to hear you. Yeah, so thank you.
I do have a mouse
Some
voice,
people in the
so-
back might not.
I think that I had a few instances with this as well, is that in providing empathy and also confidentiality, that they can come to you and feel safe to come to you and understand that, like, we're all human. We all are going through something some way or another, and having them just understand that we're there for them and being like, yes, I can provide you some leniency in the matter based on what you're going through, but also having them understand that there are expectations and these things are going to happen in life, especially after college is done. You're going to experience more adult issues, so just knowing that I'm there for you and providing you empathy and I understand you and I hear you, but also just being like, okay, there are expectations and priorities that we need to discuss as well. So just kind of going on both sides of the spectrum there and having them understand that from all sides of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's what a lot of students want to hear. Like, they want to know that their instructor, their professor, like, really cares, you know, about their situation. And sometimes they might be scared to share that type of thing. So if you can cultivate that, you know, environment, and then also encourage them still to finish, because right, Richard, you also want them to finish your class, right? To like complete these assignments. So having some structured ways or plans to actually do that, and if they do miss, you know, having some options for them to kind of, you know, keep up. Okay, all right. Does anyone else want to share anything about that case or questions about that case? Yes, yeah.
Eduardo Vivanco, Interior Architecture, only because Professor Naik is pressuring me to share this, but I think there was another comment. So I had an experience in which before a midterm exam, I received at least 4 emails about anxiety, mental health, and I offer office hours and reassure them and walk them through the exam and help them prepare for that, but nonetheless, it was a fiasco and half of the class underperformed. So the next day, or when I handed out a really bad exam, I said, I've learned that testing is not a good tool for us to evaluate your knowledge. So I'm offering you a possibility of coming on the final exam to do a final research paper instead, if you feel that that will be a better tool for you. And also they were given a chance to improve their grade by having a reading assignment in which they also reflected on the experience of writing about a text and text comprehension and all of those things. And then there was this other option of retaking the exam.
Yeah, just in terms of using growth mindset, involving the students in a kind of structured peer review, having them contribute to the structure of the test itself, and putting up sort of sample questions. I think that helps, as long as they feel, and also that it's not a one take, that they have the option to come back and retake the test or retake parts of the test for partial credit.
Sure.
I think a lot of students don't take advantage of these, but if they know that they're out there, then it doesn't seem as final and helps alleviate some anxiety.
Yeah, I heard a lot of interesting things come out of, you know, the practices you've used. So thinking about choice, giving students alternatives, because in the end, what we want to do is we want them to learn, right? And so some of the students might be on a different trajectory, but in the end, we have learning goals and objectives for them. So if they can express their learning in other ways, in other forms, so that gives them some, you know, choice or agency with regards to that. And then absolutely, you mentioned, you know, several good things to really think about in terms of the design, co-creation with students, co-creating some questions and things of that nature, also in the design of assignments and assessments too. Great, okay. Thank you for sharing all of those. All right, so I know I have a couple more things to share, and I know we also want to get to some questions. So I'm also going to go over, I think, the last one, because that was a popular one, quiet learners, okay? So this is when students who are sometimes in your class and they're just a little quieter, and you want to engage everybody in this idea of participation, engagement, and things of that nature. So those who talked about this case, what types of things did you come up with? How do we design courses so it's more equitable? Yes, in the back. Thank you for running. Giving extra time. Yeah. You have a mic coming.
Hi, Rich Nastasi, School of Sports Science. First of all, with quiet learners, I think this is incredibly critical. And that first thing to do, I think, would be important is to affirm their quietness. And people are quiet for many different reasons. And what I'd like to point out is the fact that it could be cultural. There are many cultures for the student-professor relationship to be a quiet one, right? Please don't make me talk in class. I am present, but I am culturally resistant to make that connection. I'll come to office hours, that'll be absolutely wonderful, but please don't make me talk in class. And so I hear you not hearing. I hear you not speaking. So I think it's really important.
Absolutely. So I think that those are really good points. And then so is when we grade participation and only that, is that a true equitable way to do it? Is it inclusive, right, to do it in that way? Are there ways that we can also increase, the way we think about participation and engagement, considering all of these factors? I see another comment in the back. Great.
Hi, Jen Flewelling, School of Education. I love a good chalk talk. And so I'll put the giant sticky note chart paper up around a class with some guiding questions in the middle of the chart paper, and everybody has a marker in hand. And you either rotate or float, and you have a chance to add your thinking to the chart paper. And then in small groups, students will synthesize our whole group thinking, and the louder learners like myself will report out on behalf of the group. But it gives the opportunity for equity of voice, gives quiet learners the opportunity to participate in maybe an anonymous way or just a nonverbal way.
Great, thank you for sharing that strategy. So it makes me think of on our page when we do equitable participation, we saw that happening in your class. It would definitely be, the one that was coded, but lots of good things there. It gives everybody a chance, even quiet learners, to engage, and even if they're not speaking out like aloud, right? And so I think that's a really great strategy. All right, does anybody else want to share some thoughts? Yes, on this one. This is a big one. A lot of our instructors have a hard time with this one, so that's why I think it's a really important one to discuss.
Anna Emlinger. I work with Canvas Design in using Canvas as a support for the classroom teaching and also online. So I would like to mention the discussion board option that we have in Canvas. And that can be a great space to continue a discussion that was initiated in the classroom, or it can be a space for a discussion to be started and then continued in the classroom. So a student that is a quiet learner or that English is not their first language, they have the opportunity to participate in that discussion. That doesn't necessarily requires them speaking in front of others. So that's my suggestion.
Great, yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. So you have your learning management system has these tools in it, right, to encourage equitable participation. And so sometimes people call that like creating like a back channel or something of that nature, where you have, kind of another space where students can respond, and it's not necessarily that they have to raise their hand, so they could do the online discussion on Canvas. Some will also create like a collaborative Google Doc, and maybe they could also comment there during class or some kind of poll or something of that nature. But you can use technologies and our advantage here to build more equitable participation in classes for students. So thank you so much for raising that as well. All right, great. Well, I hope you had a lot of great discussions on some of the other cases too. I just want to take a minute and just ask before we move on, are there any things that you really want to talk about in those other cases? I know we didn't get a chance to talk about all of them. Anything come up that you're like, yeah, we should definitely hear from others? Let me give a minute for that. Okay, yes, yeah, sure.
Sorry for speaking again. I don't want to dominate the discussion, but in the number 4, right, I would like just to share a quick experience that I had in a previous institution. I was very new in the institution, and we had, that was 2017, we had white supremacist incident in our baseball field. And I was teaching Introduction to Geography in the classroom in that time. And as you mentioned, the case of Tyre Nichols, we are not prepared for this. They just happen, and we don't want to wait to address the issues, even though many times we don't feel that we have knowledge enough to address them. But in that case, I was looking at my students, and I knew I had to say something, even though I didn't have answers. And so what I decided to do was just to open the space. So I told them I was profoundly sad with the situation, and I didn't have answers, but I wanted to give them space to talk and to share. And they did. And in the end of the class, they came to talk to me and said, "Professor, I'm so thankful because my other professors don't seem to care."
Yeah.
And I know they did care, but there's a huge barrier when these things happen, and we don't feel that we have knowledge enough, that we are not experts in the topic, and many times we decide not to address. So what I want to say is that we don't need to know everything, but we need to give our students space to vent.
Great. Yeah. I love that. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that and for providing that space for your students. Some of the work we've done with our student fellows, and we actually have talked to them about what do you want your professors to do, like in those situations. And the number one thing they say is we want them to acknowledge that it happened. Like just at least acknowledge like that this stuff is going on in the world that is impacting them in some way. Like at least acknowledge it. And you know, absolutely in your example, you talked about it, you acknowledged it, et cetera. So they just want, you know, they want that. And then they also mentioned, and these are all these good practices that you also did, that you can kind of get the pulse of the room. If it feels like the student should speak about it, because it's actually could inhibit like any of the learning they're doing anyway, because they're thinking about it, especially if something just happened or it's concurrent with your class. Give them that space, but moderate it. So they always say that it should be a well-moderated discussion by the professor as well. Another thing they said is that you can do things in your class that you don't really have to get people to talk about their viewpoint. So you could just say, how are you all feeling right now, right? Like, and then maybe like write down a few words, do a little free write, or like something like that, where students can still get out how they're feeling, you know, but not necessarily it turns into a very large thing, especially depending on how controversial and where your class stands and all the students, et cetera. So there's all these other practices you could also do to just acknowledge it. But I love how you shared that, like, you know, opening that space that not everybody feels comfortable, but at least acknowledging it. Like that's huge for students. You don't have to agree or whatever or talk about it a lot. You should acknowledge it though, and I think that's valuable. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so lots of great discussions about very important topics that will continue to impact, you know, our teaching and higher education. I just want to, before we conclude, and also if we have some time for questions and we can explore some of the topics if we do have time. I know Tracy had mentioned some to me too, but when we're in this now era of rapid expansion and accessibility of all of these large language models and generative AI, et cetera, right? Like, so there's so much going on with this right now as we see, and our students are using it too. We surveyed our students. We know many of them are using it and for what reasons and how and all of that kind of thing. But I wanted to kind of bridge it with thinking about inclusion and equity, because I think it actually introduces a lot of interesting things with regards to inclusion and equity. We have an article that will come out soon, and this is actually, I co-authored this with a colleague who runs our Student for Academic Purpose Center, so for multilingual, works with multilingual learners. And then also one of our colleagues who works a lot, he's an English professor who works with thinking about large language models and whatnot, and a student, so students on there, of course, and we've got students on there. She helped with also the analysis. But when we think about generative AI and equity, there's so many promises, right, that it has, because we can think about it, it can support language learning, right? Like, and we actually talk about that in our article. It can actually help students learn new languages, et cetera. Skills can be acting like, almost like a tutor, giving feedback to the students. I mean, that's amazing. We can also think about students who are neurodivergent, students with disabilities, and generative AI, some of these tools as helping and assisting with them as well, because they can sometimes use assistive technologies and things like that to promote their success. But I've also heard from some of our students where, like, let's say it's a student who has ADHD, maybe has trouble sometimes kind of organizing information and making sense of it and putting it all together. Putting all of their notes into one of these tools and having them organize it for them in a logical way, and even asking questions to it to better learn, that can be transformative for some students, right? That can be a very big help for them as well. So we have to think about also how these tools, and I think over time we're going to see more personalized learning being able to happen. So thinking about the variation in our learners, if we can build these tools, and maybe we'll later see them course specific, that you have a chatbot for your class, who knows, right? Like the future, who knows? But you have a chatbot for your class, and that's that help instruction, right? Like, so students can actually ask it questions and can ask quizzes and create quizzes on it and do practice, and all of this type of thing is possible, and that can actually support learning of students that are coming into our classes from a variety of backgrounds, right? Knowledge, skills, et cetera, experiences, and whatnot. So we can kind of think of those things as well. Some of the big issues, of course, that we've seen these is, what are they training on? What's the data set that they're using? Is there bias? You know, can things come out biased? Things come out inaccurate. We know these things can hallucinate. There's always this fact checking, making sure it's accurate, et cetera. We also see challenges. Is this going to help students learn if they can just put in this into ChatGPT and get a paper out of it in my class? So we're also seeing that we have to have policies and procedures, and thinking about the students' process of learning more. Maybe we also have to have them show us the outputs of what they use, et cetera, and these tools and things of that nature. So we have to start thinking about these topics. We also have to think about access. So some of the tools, it could create a disparity between students because they can buy the best version of whatever it is, whereas some students might only be able to do the open access version of these tools. I think there's going to be a lot of questions and things that come out that really implicate equity work and inclusion work with regards to generative AI, and we'll just have to see what happens as this time goes on. But I think all of us, as thinking about inclusion, we have to really think about this. And I will say, and I know maybe this institution maybe uses plagiarism detectors and things like that. Different institutions have different philosophies on them. My institution does not, because they don't subscribe to them, and they haven't for a while. But one thing that they did know is that, like, even if we look at our plagiarism detectors, they did a recent study, and they found that they target students who they can target students whose English is not their native language more. So when we think about, like, also some of the things that we're trying to do to build more inclusive classrooms, do we really want that, right? Do we really want to target and bias against certain students and groups and things of that nature? So these are going to be big questions of our future, but things to really think about, I think, and consider as we continue to build more inclusive classroom spaces. And we can continue to talk about these. I'm just going to talk about a few resources, and then I would like to see if we have a few minutes, we can do questions. But as you saw, What Inclusive Instructors Do is out there. So you're always welcome to think about that book as thinking about your journey on inclusive teaching. Our next book, as I mentioned, is coming out in March. We do have a book launch webinar. You're all invited, so feel free if you like to come to our launch. We did, for this book, invite students to write the foreword, and these are students that worked closely with me on inclusion and looking at classroom teaching. And so they actually wrote the foreword. They're going to come to our book launch as well. One is graduated, one is still a student at my institution. And there's also a discount flyer, so if you want to buy it. And I mentioned the Inclusive Teaching Visualization Project. That's out there. Feel free to always access that and that protocol. If you're interested in further work with the protocol, I just started a community group. So if you think about like you're actively going to use it at your institution or things like that, you can absolutely subscribe to that group. We're going to be really thinking about ways to use it and also thinking about scholarship, sharing our practices. Some institutions have adopted it in different ways and they use it for various reasons. And then you can always subscribe to my newsletter. So I just started a newsletter. So I'll be sharing lots of things that come out in our research and whatnot and ideas around the topics that we've also been exploring. So I did want you all to be able to recognize that. So thank you so much. And again, we'll do some questions after this, but in investing in it. This is a journey. We're always going to be taking it. It's an ongoing process. So we're always learning, right, like in teaching. And I think we should be just like our students. So I just thank you so much for the time that you've taken today, to do this and all the rest of the stuff you're going to talk about in the rest of the conference too. So thank you. And then I'd like to see if there are some questions. I'm happy to answer or explore topics in more detail. You might have some questions at this point. So thank you. Thank you, Tracy.
Hi, I'm Catherine Webster Rogers in the School of Sports Science. We were talking a little bit about, I try to work really hard in creating a safe environment in the classroom, and really, for me, seeing students critically think through things is really important to our discipline because things change all the time in healthcare. So trying to get them to think in the moment and really process what's happening instead of just regurgitating facts. So I try to affirm a lot of when they do contribute in class, but sometimes I still get feedback on my course evaluations that it still doesn't feel like a safe environment. And part of what we discussed is that sometimes it's not from me so much as from their fellow students, that's what makes them feel unsafe.
Yeah.
So I was curious to know if you had any thoughts about ways that we could approach that to continue to keep it safe so they can talk through these difficult scenarios and process in those ways and still feeling safe, even though I talk about, let's make this a safe space and everybody's voice is heard and trying to affirm as they're speaking, but they still don't always feel great about in front of their colleagues, peers.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because we see this a lot where it's like, it's the student-student interactions that are a challenge with inclusion. Students might have a history with certain students. In addition, they just might not feel welcome or safe for other reasons, right? For interacting with other students in their class. So I think this is a really good question. So it was mentioned a little bit earlier to think about using these kind of classroom guidelines or having these discussions right in the beginning. And you mentioned like you've done some of that kind of already in your class. One step further for that too is you could also co-create them with students. So I had actually a faculty fellow, she actually focused on this, and she had difficult topics she would talk about in class too, but so she would actually have the students co-create those guidelines with her, and she'd actually engage them in an exercise each semester at the beginning, and basically in that exercise, they would talk about what makes a supportive environment for them when they want to and they talk in class and what does not. And then they kind of distilled it all. And she had some guidelines, I think, initially, too, to start them off. And then they actually co-created them together. And they had those discussions as well. And then they posted that in their learning management system. And that's what they always came back to. So this gives a little bit more when you co-create if students don't feel safe, right, in the class, and there's other reasons why they don't, to actually have them engage in that process early and then kind of go from there. Because it could bring up some things that are, that you might not have thought about. It will allow them to talk through things with each other too, to think about creating that space. So one of the advice I would say is you could try something like that. And you could see if that could also support students in that, and feeling more safe spaces in their classrooms. Another thing to think about is these other alternative ways to participate. Again, we talked about the LMS, we talked about these other ways, but if there are other ways that you can also have avenues for them to do that, and you mentioned at the end of the course, they say this, you can, I think that came up before, mid-course, so you can actually ask them that too, halfway through, what could help, kind of build this or kind of revisit that, and that actually would you get feedback on if you change your practice, like at the beginning, like do the co-creation, and then you could get feedback on that if that has helped, et cetera. It would be interesting to know, a little bit more about why the students don't feel that way, right? Because there's so many reasons why they could feel that way in that class, but I think having those kinds of discussions and getting some feedback along the way could potentially help, support that a little bit more. Thanks for that question. Great question. All right, other questions, comments, or things you want to talk about more? No? Okay, well, I know you're going to have more discussions over lunch anyway, so I hope that they're great and that you can take a lot of this, and maybe there's something that really resonated with you, today that you might try out or do a little bit differently or think about a little bit differently in your courses. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful lunch.
Thank you, Tracy.
Braving the technological struggles.
Oh, absolutely. It all worked out.
Yeah,
it's all
it
good.
does.
Yes. They're really engaged. It's nice that you have the lunch after. That's really good. So they can, engage further. Yeah. All right. I'm gonna close off everything here. Are you using this again?
No.
Okay. Great.
Today is a half day and tomorrow is a half day. So.
Okay. It's calm. Yeah.
Okay. 21. So more than half my life. Okay. So Google Forms is fantastic for this because I will have them do it in class and then I'll put it up on my graphs and chart. Like, so it's like it's our very first class activity. The problem I have is that and so I'm like, and you need to recognize that diversity is a lot, and you need to recognize that you're in my rock star life backgrounds and experiencing different things. So I just have like all different types of questions just to show like. I thought about confidence questions. Yeah, I do it for well, I do it for the things that we get in because we're doing yeah, I definitely started with that. Basically, like you're not the only one or focused, but technology requirement. But now because of DIV, I get so many more people sign up for the class. And I told our dean, I was like, we need to put the major section because we'll teach two in the fall. Like they both need to be mixed. So our engineers are in class with like business and education, sports science majors, and it's so good for them to start.
Yeah, we have some like luck and flow series, and they just have and that's the integration. So like across.
What state is
Pennsylvania. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you did mention that.
Okay, sure.
it just won't, it's not recognizing. I don't even have my own laptop. This is the podium's laptop. What the heck?
Okay.
She's going behind the screen.
Just trying to. Where is the? What? Who was here before?
It was just the speaker, and they used this laptop was already logged in.
Oh.
It came up, so it must be, it's the podium's laptop.
Yeah, let me go get on. Hold on 1 second. Normally it's not like this.
It doesn't, yeah, I interchanged between HDMI and this one. Like, I figure it's supposed to be either or, right?
I just don't know why it's just blue. It's like. I'll go get him. When'd your thing start?
Anyone want to do karaoke? We can end our discussion early. inclusive karaoke, where we all belong, because no one can sing.